At the edge of the Tibetan Plateau, a shadow rises so high it steals the warmth out of the jet stream and bends the winds that circle the world. Chomolungma, Sagarmatha, Everest. A mountain that has kept more bodies than it has returned. A mountain whose ridges hold the stories of those who tried to reach the roof of the world. In the summer of 1924, two men walked into the sky and did not come back. They were last seen through a break in the weather, two silhouettes climbing toward a band of steep rock, moving with purpose, perhaps even confidence. Almost a century later, the ice has begun to melt, and with it, the past begins to surface. A boot, a name, a warning. Welcome to the Time and Tales podcast. Dark history, strange lore, one tale at a time. If you enjoy the show, please follow, share, and leave a review. As always, sources and links live in the show notes. Welcome. Thanks for stopping by the Time and Tales podcast. I'm Lene.
I'm CJ.
Before we step out onto the ridge with Mallory and Irvine, a reminder, our Patreon is now officially live. That's where you'll find full-length episodes, ad-free 2 days early. Today's episode is brought to you by my incredible obsession with Mount Everest and a decade's worth of 4 a.m. deep dives. The amount of books I have on my shelf about Everest borders on unhealthy.
What is the appeal? Why are you so interested in Everest and its stories?
Well, it's fascinating. This incredible natural wonder that has drawn people to it for over thousands of years has now cast its spell on foreigners and adventure seekers from all over the world. And they die up there in droves for bragging rights. Tech bros from New York that paid $150,000 to go and die up there. I guess the main fascination for me is why. You really can't get to the top of Everest without spending a fortune and having Sherpas drag your ass uphill for several weeks. And so many die up there and they become trail markers. People just pass them on the way to the summit. It's just the why of it all. Like, why do that to yourself? Why do that to someone else? Why do that to the mountain? And I just don't understand it. So it's fascinating to me.
Do you have any book recommendations?
Oh, yeah, totally. We'll start with Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer, who wrote about the 1996 disaster in real time and kind of forced the entire climbing world to look at the mirror none of them wanted to look into. And there's also The Lost Explorer by Conrad Anker and David Roberts. And then Walt Unsworth's Everest, The Mountaineering History. And that's it for me. I don't think I have any other news. Do you, CJ?
No, I really don't. So let's get into it.
Sweet. Let's get into Everest and to 1924. Everest straddles the border of Nepal and Tibet, where the Indian tectonic plate drives into Asia with enough force and steadiness to push entire mountain ranges upward. The peak rises 8,848.86 meters. That's 29,031.7 feet tall. Or about 7 miles, really, if you're thinking about it like that. Its summit is made of marine limestone, once submerged under an ancient ocean. The mountain sits inside Sagarmatha National Park on the Nepal side, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1979, and within the Chomolungma National Nature Preserve in Tibet. The glaciers around it feed the Koshi, the Ganges Basin, and the Brahmaputra Yarlung Tsangpo, sustaining hundreds of millions of people downstream. To Himalayan communities, Everest is not simply a mountain. She is Chomolungma, the mother goddess of the world, life-giving, protective, and deeply dangerous to disturb. Long before Western climbers arrived, the mountain was understood as sacred, powerful, and alive. The British Empire first identified Peak 15 through the Great Trigonometrical Survey in the mid-19th century.
Good pronunciation of that.
I really felt like I was going to die.
It's not an everyday.
Then I started to sweat, and my hands are very damp now, trying to pronounce that word. When calculations suggested it was the tallest peak on Earth, an obsession soon began.
When you first told me about this episode and gave me a draft of what you were talking about, I went to go look for what is the Great Trigonometrical Survey.
Nice.
Trigonometrical Survey.
Trigonometrical. Yeah, now I can say it.
With abandon.
Yeah.
It was a project by the India Trading Company.
Wait, East India Trading Company?
Is that the one that had tea in India? Or,
Yeah.
okay, it was a tyrannical company, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. East India Trading Company and the Dutch East India Trading Company. Neither were great. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
They decided that they were going to map pretty much all of India. And over like 100 years, it just got bigger and bigger, or they expanded it. And through some really well calculated benchmarks, they would go and find this thing or this place, and they know exactly what its elevation is and where it is positioned on the map. Using that data, they triangulated all of these points in a big grid across everything. And one of them included Everest back when it was called Peak 15. So I guess the first like true boss of that project, his name was Everest.
I see. Okay.
Everest stayed Peak 15 until the second commissioner or executive, whose name was Waugh. And while the scientific community was actually in debate over what Everest was going to be called, Waugh said, well, Everest, he's kind of the one who found it. Let's go ahead and name it after him. Nobody liked the idea,
Yeah.
not even Everest.
I don't like it.
Yeah, he's like, this name can't be pronounced easily by the local population. It shouldn't be named after me. I've never even seen the mountain, but it was the de facto name or default name, so it became that.
I didn't know any of this, to be honest with you. I knew that Everest was a surveyor. That's all that I knew about why Everest was called Everest. It shouldn't bear the name of a British surveyor when it's been Chomolungma or Sagarmatha for the past however many thousand years. I didn't know any of that. Thank you. That's very interesting.
No problem.
Formal expeditions did not become possible until Tibet permitted foreign travel in the early 1920s. Before the south side, that's the Nepalese side, opened in 1950, every attempt came from the Tibetan side or the north face, a harsher, wind-scoured approach guarded by hanging glaciers and knife-edged ridges. In the 1920s, a school teacher, war veteran, Cambridge intellectual, and one of the most naturally gifted climbers Britain ever produced, named George Lee Mallory, enters the picture. His climbing record included the Alps, the Pyrenees, and every cliff in Wales that could hold a boot. He joined the Everest expeditions of 1921. That was just for reconnaissance. They were trying to figure out how they were going to attack the mountain. Their first major attempt was in 1922, where an avalanche killed 7 Sherpas, the first recorded Everest fatalities. Mallory always looked at it as a bit of a disappointment, despite the fact that they lost 7 people. So they ended up trying again, and this was in 1924. This would be their final push. During the 1924 attempt, Mallory would take on a bit of a protege in Andy Irvine, also known as Sandy. This 22-year-old is extremely gifted with the equipment and really talented at tinkering with the oxygen tanks that they needed to summit the mountain. The interesting part of this is that Mallory was very vehemently against climbing with oxygen. And throughout his entire career, he eschewed oxygen tanks. He decried them in media. He always kind of like turned his nose up to them. But I think between 1922 and 1924, he had a lot of time to think about the fact that Everest is much taller and much more challenging to climb than the peaks in the Alps, for example. And they needed all the help they could get to get through the death zone, which is at 26,000 feet, by the way. Sandy Irvine was an Oxford rower, a mechanic, an engineer, and again, he was only 22 years old. On an Arctic expedition, he repaired photographic gear, stoves, and motors in temperatures that destroyed metal. We're talking negative 60 degrees. His mechanical competence made him invaluable in a high-altitude world. Fragile oxygen rigs could mean life or death.
I think it was pretty interesting that they knew oxygen was required at that elevation, especially at that time. And they even had oxygen, I guess, distillation methods.
I think it was developed during World War I because of the advent of bombing planes and fighter jets, right? They realized that they couldn't fly at altitude to drop bombs or whatever without oxygen apparatuses. And the first units were really clunky and heavy and really hard to use and transport. By the time they get to Everest in 1924, they've had about a decade or so to tinker with these machines. And they're much, much smaller, but they would still be much heavier than what we are accustomed to today. And they were very finicky and had a bunch of little valves and knobs and like all kinds of stuff on them. Your body is trying to put you to sleep. It's trying to tell you to take off all your clothes. It's trying to tell you that you're dying. You're not getting enough air. You're not getting enough oxygen. You are sick the entire time and you can't think. Cognition just completely goes out the window. So I think he understood that oxygen was the way forward. If the mountain was going to be conquered, it was going to be conquered with oxygen. And on that note, Mallory chose Irvine not for experience, but for reliability. The young man who could keep the oxygen sets from freezing, clogging, or failing on the ridge. Another man who was on their team was Noel Odell. He was a geologist, a fossil specialist, and a mountaineer. He had climbed in the Alps and Himalaya and served as the team's, quote, high climbing geologist, end quote. More importantly, he was the last person to see Mallory and Irvine alive. On June 8, 1924, Mallory and Irvine left Camp 4 on the Northeast Ridge. The oxygen sets were heavy. The regulators iced over easily. Their leather boots stiffened in the cold. Their wool clothing was layered but uninsulated by modern standards. These are layers and layers of silk and wool. And that is just not enough to meet -40 to -60 temperatures and wind speeds of between 100 and 140 miles an hour. At 12:50 p.m., through a tear in the clouds, Odell saw two figures surmounting what he believed was the second step, moving upward, quote, with great alacrity, end quote. Then the clouds swallowed them both, and they never returned. Their disappearance became a myth. Had they reached the summit nearly 30 years before Hillary and Norgay, or had the climb turned fatal somewhere below? The mountain held no answers. In the 1920s, Everest was an alien world. Many, many nasty surprises awaited European climbers who had made names for themselves on peaks half the height of Everest. Some of the most notable include hypoxia. This causes slow judgment and erodes your memory. So if you're putting on a coat, let's say, or you're trying to fasten a button, a task that would normally take you, 1 to 2 seconds tops, could take as many as 10 minutes because your brain is just not firing on all cylinders and everything feels very slow, sluggish, and dreamlike. HAPE is high altitude pulmonary edema. That is when your lungs flood with fluid. When you're as high as these guys get to on Everest, in the death zone, let's say at 26,000 feet, not only do your lungs fill with fluid, but that fluid can also freeze. So you take in a deep breath without a face mask, and you're inhaling cold air that freezes the fluid in your lungs and can kill you pretty quickly.
That's pretty terrible.
It's horrific.
That is terrible.
It is probably one of the number one ways people die on Everest, by the way. HACE, that is high altitude cerebral edema. That's swelling in the brain. Same situation. Difference is that once the swelling in the brain reaches a certain level, you're beyond thought. It's kind of like an aneurysm, but it's caused by fluid in your brain. So you'll be having a conversation or you're trying to struggle upward through all of this unimaginable physical pain, and then all of a sudden your brain just shuts down. That's basically what a cerebral edema will do to you. Another one would be snow blindness. And that's where your retinas are burned by the amount of bright white all around you. Our eyes are not meant to be accosted by light on such a level, and it comes from every single direction, and there is no stopping it. When people return from Everest who didn't wear goggles long enough or didn't understand the danger, they can either go blind or they will have problems with their eyes for years afterward. Let's say you accidentally left your goggles off for 10 minutes. By the time you make it off of the mountain, if you make it off the mountain, this is Everest we're talking about, you go home and you realize that your eyes are itchy, they're bothering you. Soon afterwards, you've lost between 40 and 60% of your sight permanently. That's kind of what snow blindness can do to human beings.
So it's delayed?
It can be delayed, yes. Sometimes it's instant. Sometimes people just go blind. Sometimes they're blind for a little while and they get better. And sometimes they just keep tempting fate, taking the goggles off over and over again. And then some of the other interesting dangers to keep an eye out for on Mount Everest would be crevasses. This is the one that keeps me up at night thinking about it. A crevasse is essentially a crack in a glacier and these can be up to a mile or so deep. You fall into one of these and you could get wedged into a pocket or a cave where no one can hear your screams. There are also seracs to look out for. These are masses of unstable ice that collapse without warning. They're often 12 to 20 feet high. And the next thing, obviously, avalanches. Entire teams have been swept away, including 16 Sherpa climbers in the 2014 icefall disaster. And let's not forget the base camp avalanche that killed over 20 people between 22 or 23. I can't remember which year that was. Then there's also the cold. Temperatures regularly reach negative 40 degrees Celsius. Frostbite destroys tissue in minutes. Men who walked and spoke clearly at dawn could be dead by dusk.
That's pretty metal.
It really is. Everybody's like, who do we think the most prolific serial killer on Earth was? And I'm like, Mount Everest. After Mallory and Irvine vanished, Everest did not grow kinder. 1933, Maurice Wilson attempted a solo ascent. His body was later found on the East Rongbuk Glacier. Between 1934 and 1938, several climbers died from exposure and altitude during reconnaissance and assault attempts.
I'd like to go back to Maurice.
Okay.
Maurice Wilson actually tried to do it solo without oxygen.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. So Maurice knew the danger and just tried to tough it out, and we see what happened to him.
He didn't even get off of the glacier. So that kind of makes you understand Mallory's decision to not try to summit without oxygen.
Well, Mallory was before Wilson. Wilson just tried to be...
Right, he tried to be extra.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Also, I want to really briefly, because I mentioned it a couple of times, when we're talking about reconnaissance and assault, assaulting the mountain was Mallory's tactic. He felt that you could avoid a lot of the pain and trauma of altitude sickness if you laid siege, quote unquote, to the mountain instead of just trying to go from base camp all the way up to Camp 4. What he would do is he and his teams would scout out the proper routes. That means like fixing ropes, fixing ladders, doing whatever needed to be done in successive siege attempts. He would take a handful of guys and they would go up to like Camp 1, let's say. Then they would come back down and they would go up to Camp 3, and then they would come back down and then they would go up to Camp 1 again. Do you see what I'm saying? When we're talking about assaulting the mountain or laying siege to the mountain, this is what we're talking about, and this is what modern climbers do today to attain altitude equalization. After 1938, when Nepal opened to Westerners after World War II, the mountain shifted from remote myth to national prize. And by the early 1950s, the South Side route became the new frontier. The reason is because the South Side is easier to climb than the North Face. And I'm saying easier in heavy quotations because it is not easy from whichever direction. On May 29, 1953, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay reached the summit via the southeast ridge. They stayed only 15 minutes at the summit, long enough for a photograph and for Tenzing to leave an offering to the goddess of the mountain. Their success reshaped global mountaineering, and Everest became possible, therefore desirable. But desire on Everest can be fatal.
I think it's important to note here that Tenzing got credit for being up there. I think that's pretty awesome.
How do I say this? There's still quite a lot of ethnocentrism evident in Hillary's writings, but I think for a British man living in his time period, he was one to give credit where credit was due.
What is the death zone?
The death zone refers to altitudes above 8,000 meters. That's 26,000 feet. Primarily on peaks like Mount Everest, where the oxygen pressure is so low that the human body cannot sustain itself for long periods. Most of the people that have passed away on Mount Everest are still there. Some even become trail markers, like I mentioned earlier.
Gross.
The climber called Green Boots, for example, on the north side, he was a Chinese climber. Every climbing season, hundreds of people have to pass him to get to the summit. There are dozens more, many unnamed, still frozen into the slope. Glacier movement often repositions them, but they are still there. And climate change has been exposing many of them. On that note, in May 1999, Conrad Anker discovers a body at 26,760 feet on the north face, just below the yellow band. George Mallory, the man himself, laying face down, torso intact, rope scars visible on his ribs. One leg was broken and laid over the other, as if he was trying to alleviate pain. His snow goggles were inside of his pocket, suggesting he climbed or descended in darkness. But his hair was still blonde, his skin was still fair, as if he had been mummified. One very important item was missing from his person: the vest pocket Kodak camera he was taking with him to the summit in 1924.
I want to bring that up as well. The vest pocket Kodak camera was a very popular portable camera made by Kodak,
Yeah,
also known as a VPK. Oh, you knew this already?
I don't really know how they work.
Well, it's a tiny little kind of bellows camera. You've seen them where somebody is taking a family portrait and they've got that black shroud that they pull out.
Oh, it's like that?
Yeah, it's like that. One of the other people on the team, a guy named Howard Summerall, actually had that camera and gave it to Mallory. Go take a picture while you're up there. I thought that was really interesting.
So it's like the accordion camera is
Yeah,
the one I'm
that's
thinking.
exactly what it is. Yeah, exactly.
How did it fit into his pocket then?
That was the ingenious part of it. The accordion part collapsed and it just closed up into this vest pocket sized little case.
Would have a tripod and stuff too?
It was point and shoot. I read the advertisements by Kodak. Kodak's jingle was, "You carry the VPK for life's little surprises."
Wow. Somebody should write a book about this and call it Life's Little Surprises. If Mallory had reached the summit, the film might still be inside of that camera and it might still hold a photograph of them posing at the summit of Mount Everest 30 years before Tenzing and Hillary. But because his camera is missing, that only deepens the mystery, right? Because if it wasn't in his pocket, did he drop it or did Sandy have it?
Where is the camera?
Exactly. By the 1990s, Everest was no longer an explorer's mountain. It was a business. Clients paid large sums for guided ascents. Synthetic gear made climbs more survivable. Helicopters shortened the approach, and fixed ropes and ladders made technical sections accessible to those without advanced experience. But none of it would function without Sherpa labor, let's be clear. Sherpas cut routes through the Khumbu icefall, ferry loads heavier than most clients could carry at sea level, fix ropes and ladders, carry oxygen, support rescues, and endure most of the risk for far less recognition. And the pressure of the guiding industry pushed expeditions onward even when judgment advises retreat, and even when the people most impacted by that are the Sherpas who actually live near the mountain. On May 10, 1996, delays and bottlenecks at the Hillary Step consumed critical hours.
Okay, what is the Hillary Step?
The Hillary Step is a sheer wall that stands between a climber and the summit of Everest. When Hillary and Norgay get to this sheer cliff face, they had to scale that thing without ropes and pitons. So there were no ladders, there were no anything. They just had to use technical climbing know-how to get up that sheer cliff face. And this is after you're exhausted climbing along that knife-line ridge for however many thousand feet. So all of the delays and all of the crazy lines that we're seeing pictures of, they start at the Hillary Step. That day on 1996, a storm hits and visibility completely vanishes on the mountain. Everything is white. Turnaround times were completely ignored. They were supposed to go up 2 hours earlier than they did, and they were supposed to go back down 2 hours earlier than they did. 8 people died that day, and then 12 died throughout that season. This was the worst climbing season up to that point since the 1922 avalanche that killed 7 Sherpas. Sherpa climbers executed heroic rescues, but the scale of the catastrophe could not be unwound. Crack hours into thin air exposed the structural failures of commercial pressure, guide to client imbalances, inexperience, overconfidence, crowding. Everest had become something Mallory would never have recognized. By the 2010s, Summit Day photographs showed single-file human chains stretching along the southeast ridge at 28,000 feet, a place where the body is actively and slowly dying. Climbers run out of oxygen standing still, some collapse, some have to step over bodies to continue. Ambition and money now shape the mountain more than the weather. And that's not the only problem that we're facing on Mount Everest nowadays. Everest's garbage problem is global news, but its real crisis is even deeper than that. Microplastics are now being identified in high-altitude snow. Tons of buried oxygen bottles. When I say tons, I mean literal tons. Actual weight, tons. Human waste frozen into crevasses that supply water downstream for thousands of miles. Fuel leaks near base camp. Khumbu icefall instability. The icefall is breaking up. It's a glacier, remember, and that glacier is diminishing. Unpredictable meltwater flow affecting millions downstream. The Rongbuk Glacier has lost more than 25% of its volume since early 20th century measurements. Climate change is unmasking what Everest buried, including the past. Here's where we're going to get into that point where ecology and historical mystery kind of merge together in a weird soup. In 2024, on the central Rongbuk Glacier, a single boot emerged. Inside of that boot was a human foot. On the sock, stitched initials read A.C. Irvine.
It was only a boot.
It was a foot.
So
in a
there
boot.
is the rest of a body somewhere.
Exactly.
Oh, gosh.
Yes. And if he's down on the glacier and Mallory is up at 28,000 feet, think about that. The discovery does two things at once. It narrows the possible location of Irvine's body and possibly the camera he carried, if he carried the camera. And it confirms that the glacier is melting at a rate never before documented. The mountain is giving back what she once sealed away, not through generosity, but through loss. We don't have time to get into all the theories about what may have actually happened to Mallory and Irvine. The leading theory is that George and Sandy were pushing hard for the top, like Noel said that they were, during the day, right? But if George's goggles were in his pocket, that means that they were descending in the dark. So that means that something happened near the summit that kept them up there a lot longer than they were supposed to be there. And if they're descending in the dark, odds are that George and Sandy were tied together somehow. George, being the stronger climber, would be the person on belay. And something happened to Sandy. Maybe he slipped. His ice axe was found near George's body. He probably slipped off the ridge, dragging Mallory with him. Maybe the rope snapped and he fell, a mile down to the glacier. And that's crazy that any part of him would survive after 100 years. Not to mention that we only have any point of reference because Conrad Anker found George Mallory. So all of this is very interesting, and it keeps me up at night because I need to know. I need to know what happened to him. It's horrible to think about. This poor kid is descending in the dark. He's probably unwell. He's probably gasping for air. Maybe they had a problem with their oxygen tanks. I don't know, but we do know that he fell off that mountain somehow. And he had to have because we found his boot on the glacier. So where's the rest of him? And where's the camera? Those are the other questions. Even though we can pretty much say with a good deal of certainty that no other man's foot would be in Andy Irving's boot, a DNA analysis is actually underway right now, and the climbing world is holding its breath because if the boot surfaced, then there is a very good chance that the other parts of him are on that glacier also, and they could be found. The mystery of 1924 is closer to resolution than ever, but the cost of that knowledge is the mountain's deterioration. Glaciers are thinning, ridges are destabilizing, Sherpa climbers bear increasing danger, overcrowding continues, and the watershed is consistently threatened. The world is treating Everest as both a trophy and a trend. There is more to Mount Everest than just the adventure and the mystery that we're talking about today. It is a sacred water resource, it is a goddess, and it is one of the world's greatest and most interesting natural wonders. It used to be a seabed, keep in mind, and now it is the tallest mountain on Earth. 2 men disappeared chasing a dream of touching the sky. Hundreds followed, some never returned. Their bodies become the mountain's record. If you tell the story of Everest, tell it whole. Tell of the courage, the cost, and the consequences. Everest doesn't keep our triumphs. She keeps our impact. That was our episode on Everest. I like this story because it kind of has a little bit of everything. You've got adventure, you've got mystery, you've got incredible ecology, you have an amazing natural wonder, you have the might of the Sherpa people, you have a villain, in my mind, the Europeans and people of European descent who treat it as a theme park are the villains in this tale. And, it's under threat and it needs our help and it needs our respect. At the same time, I desperately want to know what happened to Mallory and Irvine. I feel like this is one of those stories that has a little bit of everything. It is both dark history and folklore and more. And I just really want to know where the rest of Irvine is. What about you, CJ?
I agree that Everest has a lot to reveal. That's a difficult one. Actually, I'd like to go back to Noel Odell. He wasn't just the one who saw, or he wasn't the one who just saw Mallory and Irvine making their attempt at the summit. He lived to 96 years old.
He did,
He
yeah.
was still a mountaineer. He was an advocate for safe mountaineering. He was an advocate for ecology.
Yeah, he was.
That's
He
pretty
was a
amazing.
geologist. He was a scientist. He was there for the rocks. He was there for Everest.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that bagging the summit would have been a bonus for him, but I think he was there because he respected the mountain.
I agree. That's probably one of the reasons that he did not go up.
He does kind of get like pigeonholed as the guy that saw Mallory and Irvine last. But yeah, he was a fascinating individual, and he really did do a lot to try to protect Everest in his later years. And also the sport of mountaineering as a whole, you know.
Another thing I really liked that you said was if you're going to tell the story of Everest, certainly tell the whole story.
Yeah.
So give credit where it's due. Sherpas spend almost a lifetime on this mountain.
The Sherpa people have adapted to live at altitudes that humans from anywhere else in the world cannot survive at. And they are the true MVPs. There are a few dudes, like one of the characters from Into Thin Air, very famous Russian climber who also wrote his own account of that night because he took issue with John Krakauer's interpretation. He was also a purist like Mallory. He was determined to summit Everest without oxygen. And he was one of the guides. And he did, in fact, save a couple people's lives. I forget what his name is. I'll make sure his name is in the show notes. It slips my mind right now. But he could climb Everest without oxygen. And his opinion has always been that if you cannot reach the top of that mountain without help, then you have no business being there. I am kind of the same opinion. You and me, we like to hike. We like to check out cool new places. We like to go out and take pictures. We like to do all kinds of cool things. There are just some things that I'm not going to attempt because I have no business attempting them. This Russian climber, he trained for decades and he grew up in the Urals in Russia, if I am not mistaken. They have a lot of the same weather conditions, so he was training from birth to do this. People like you and me who lived in Florida for 20, 30 years, we're certainly not people who belong at the top of Everest. As much as I would love to see it with my own eyes, I would love to hike to base camp. That's actually a bucket list item for me. I have no desire to try to climb her. And I certainly don't have any desire to pay somebody a mortgage to climb that mountain and potentially die on it for bragging rights. I understand that it's an accomplishment, but my point here, I guess, as gently as I can put it, if you can't do it alone, I'm not sure that it's the accomplishment you are actually looking for. I'm sure that that might piss some people off, and I'm sorry in advance, but those are my feelings about Everest and commercial climbing.
Okay.
What do you think about it?
What do I think about commercial climbing? I'm pretty mixed about that sort of thing. I think the fewer people in nature, the better. I think that we should keep hidden places hidden. Remote places should stay remote because no matter what we do, we have an impact. Even the most conscientious climber will leave something. And exactly, all of that stuff, all of that just stacks up. I'm with the Russian guy. If you can't do it on your own 2 feet, then you really shouldn't be there. Absolutely.
So I agree with that. However, I will say I grew up in a bad neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan. We didn't really have a lot of trees. We didn't have a lot of nature. They weren't taking us on hikes and, they weren't taking us to places where we could gain an appreciation for the outside world or for the outdoors. I got my love of the outdoors from my father, who is a biologist and an avid hiker and outdoorsman. But my mother's side of the family, no, I don't think any of them have ever hiked a day in their life. And they just don't. The attitudes towards nature and towards environmentalism are just not a thing that you're going to find in a place that's desperately poor, for example, in an inner city where that's not a factor in their daily lives. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I do think that there is benefit and value and taking people who don't have experience with the outdoors to experience them and to show them how wonderful, precious, and worth protecting it is. I don't think that a lot of people can appreciate a thing or genuinely care for a thing until they have experience with said thing. So while I do agree with you that a mountain like Mount Everest should certainly not be attempted, no mountain peak should be attempted by someone who doesn't have the experience of that mountain peak or any mountain peak for that matter. I do think tours that encourage ecological outreach and environmentalism are invaluable, especially in today's extremely digital environment. Am I making sense? Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me.
I think more hiking clubs, 2 thumbs up. More hiking to Mount Everest, 2 thumbs down. I don't know, guys. Let us know what you think about this. We definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. And I'm kind of on the fence about it, as you might have guessed, because one part of me really wants to know what happened to Mallory and Irvine, and one part of me really wants to see the mountain, and another part of me really wishes that they would stop doing these tours because they are trashing the place, literally. I'll make sure that our reading list and links are in the show notes for you guys today, so you guys can make yourself a nice reading list. Do you have anything you want to add, CJ?
That's it for me.
That's it for me too, guys.
Next time. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Time and Tales podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, leave a review, and share it with a friend. That's how we grow. You can find us on Facebook or join the Patreon for early and extended episodes. And for any of my writing or my books, you can head to lmrevere.com. Sources and links, as always, are in the show notes. See you guys next time.